Hello and welcome to Ghost Stories with Isabella. We have another episode made for you today. Well, I'm making it right now, packed with ghost stories and paranormal encounters. Today, joining me, I have as a guest Daniel.
Hello.
And let's just get into it. Let's start reading the stories. So the first story I have for you today is called The Butcher Knife in the Bathtub. These stories actually come from a book that I'm reading. It's called It Was a Dark and Creepy Night, which is a fantastic name for a book. It's real-life encounters with the strange, mysterious, and a downright terrifying. And that's by Joshua P. Warren. You can buy this book online from Amazon. Okay. In 1997, my girlfriend and I were renting a huge, beautiful old duplex in South Minneapolis. My girlfriend worked the night shift, 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. I would go to bed just after she left for work, and she would wake me up in the morning when she returned home. One morning, she woke me up and asked why there was a butcher knife in the bathtub. I told her I had no idea, and we laughed it off. A few weeks later, she woke me up again, asking why bone cutters were in the bathtub. Again, we just laughed this off, as the kitchen was adjacent to a bathroom, and the butcher block knife holder was on the counter just outside of that bathroom. A month or so later, a similar thing happened. My girlfriend asked why the bone cutters were in the bathroom sink this time. This odd occurrence continued throughout the 3 years that we lived in the duplex. A total of probably 10 times, somehow in the night, kitchen cutlery ended up in the bathtub or the bathroom sink, and once even in the toilet. Towards the end of our time there, twice the butcher knife was found laying on the floor at the foot of our bed. During our last weekend in the duplex, we threw a party and we invited the downstairs tenants to join in. There was a couple who had lived in the building for a few years, and during the course of the conversation and drinks, the subject of our landlord came up. We both went white when they informed us that in 1968, our landlord's mother had committed suicide in our unit, in the bathtub, with a butcher's knife.
So what were the bone cutters?
I don't know. I don't know why someone would have bone cutters in their bathroom. That's very odd.
I mean, yes, it's strange that they end up in the bathtub or whatever, but it's strange that they're in the house at all, I would think.
No, I absolutely agree. Okay, our next story is called Stephen, and it's from Janae Chaplin, who's an artist in Wisconsin, and this took place in 1991. During the early winter months, along the shores of Lake Michigan, my friends and I ventured out to a historic hotel to have dinner. Much of the hotel was closed for the winter season, so only the bar and dining room areas were open that night. Following dinner, we all headed to the bar area. Despite the cold outside, things were noisy and excited because the Packers were winning that night. I left the lively scene to use the restroom, and on my way back, I decided to have a look around the rest of the beautiful Victorian-era hotel by myself. It had tall windows facing the lake, and had just enough moonlight coming in through them so that I could see around the room. There were small tables and chairs arranged in cosy groups opposite the check-in desk, with a thick red carpet that ran the length of the reception area. My attention was drawn ahead to the dark wooden staircase that led to the second floor. Looking back towards the bar area, I made sure that no one had noticed that I was missing, and then I decided to venture up the stairs. Upon reaching the first floor landing, I could make out 2 rows of metal bed frames lined both sides of the area. The mattresses were rolled up for winter storage. Just as I was thinking that I should get back to the bar, I noticed a light around the corner at the far end of the landing area. I wondered why anyone would be up at this level, and so I decided to investigate. The floor creaked under my feet as I tried to quietly maneuver. I paused to make sure I didn't hear anyone coming to look for me. I rounded the corner to discover 4 steps leading to a beautiful, heavy wooden door. I stood there amazed, staring at the craftsmanship and construction. There was a thick layer of dust on the steps, and clearly visible in that dust were small footprints. A lone child had recently been through this door. I hadn't seen any children in the hotel restaurant, and certainly there weren't any in the bar. I could only rationalize that the child was in some kind of trouble, and so I picked up my foot to climb the stairs. Before my foot touched the first step, there was a very loud, startling noise as the heavy door exploded open in front of me. It slammed against the wall, and the coldest wind that I have ever felt rushed over me, raging like an ice-cold river. I moved faster than I ever had before in my life in a rush to get back to the bar and the crowd of people there. I was pale and trembling as I collapsed into my seat. I couldn't blink, speak, or even think clearly. The bartender leaned down in front of me and asked what had happened. I don't know. I'm not sure. I can't, I continued stammering. When I looked into his eyes, I could see that he knew what was going on. He knew exactly what had happened to me. His face went white as his eyes grew round and opened. He said, "You met Stephen." "Stephen? Who is Stephen?" I said. Casting glances to either side, the bartender leaned closer to my ear. "I just broke up with my girlfriend, you see. I'd been pretty bummed about it. Yesterday I was on my hands and knees polishing this fancy glassware. When I broke down, I just started crying. I didn't want anyone to know, obviously, so I just stayed there on the floor. At that time I felt someone rubbing my back and telling me it was all right, and not to cry. I felt so much better, until I realized I was the only one in the bar. The kitchen staff had gone into town to pick up food for the dinner service. Things like this happen a lot. The rest of the staff are from this area and they grew up with Stephen's story." I asked what the story was, and the bartender continued. "One night, a couple arrived after dark with a little boy. They skipped out the next day without paying their bill. The manager went up to their room to see if they had left anything behind to pay with what they owed, only to find the little boy there. He was dead. We decided to call the ghost Stephen. So Stephen has never left the hotel."
So Stephen is the little boy?
Stephen's a little boy. You got to wonder, it doesn't mention how did he die. That's very Estes Park, very Stanley Hotel. Okay, so this next story is called A Husband's Comfort. This is by Brenda Kilpatrick Bates, who was retired from Glenville, North Carolina. This story was written in 2011. "My husband was killed when a tree fell on him." That doesn't sound very nice, still, does it? "His back was turned, and I don't think he saw it coming. During the following months of grief, I had many dreams of him that mostly left me confused. One night I dreamed of him and decided not to be upset by it, but instead to confront him and ask him about his sudden death. In the dream, we were in a panelled room with books and chairs, and I asked him about his death. He proceeded to sit down in one of the chairs, get up, and then move to another chair. He sat down, and then he said, 'It was like knowing you sat in that chair, but somehow suddenly finding yourself in this chair.' My question was answered. I don't think he felt a thing." That's interesting, and I was thinking about it when I read that story, but why, if, let's say the tree fell on him and her husband had no idea that he had died, why confront your husband in a dream and be like, "Why did you die?" Surely he wouldn't know either if it hit him from behind.
Yeah, no, it's a curious thing.
I think she perhaps just wanted closure. Okay.
So how do you distinguish between the dream and the ghost sighting? How does that work?
This definitely seems like a dream, but I think the idea is that sometimes, and I've had one of these dreams, sometimes what it is that people will have a dream, and then it will usually be a relative or someone they know in the dream, but the conversation will seem so clear, and so much so as if you're awake, that when you are awake you believe that it was real and not just a dream.
Seems like a different manifestation than a haunting.
Definitely not a haunting. Definitely a dream. Definitely a dream. Okay. This next story is called Vacation Chill. This is by an ex-Navy officer. Oh, I guess an engineer. And this takes place in Savannah, Georgia in 2006. "My wife and I went to Savannah, Georgia for a mini vacation at the end of the summer a few years ago. While there, we stayed at a popular hotel chain directly on the Savannah River. We arrived on a Thursday and some Navy friends of ours came down from Virginia to spend some time with us. We had a marvelous time seeing the sights in Savannah and hearing about the yellow fever outbreak in the early colonial days, which killed quite a few of the settlers. Of course, we heard many ghost stories while on our tours about the buildings in Savannah. It was a Saturday night when our friends decided to leave a bit early to visit family in central Georgia. So my wife and I decided to go to bed early that night. We packed our bags and we placed them neatly against the wall in preparation for a quick getaway in the morning. Everything was peaceful until 3 a.m., when just as I was startled awake for some reason, I noticed the bags that were so neatly placed against the wall were now strewn about the floor as if someone was looking for something. I assumed that my wife had been up during the night and could have been looking for something and had left the bags unorganized. I got up and neatly rearranged the bags and laid down and went back to sleep. Just as my head touched the pillow and I pulled up the covers, the coldest hand I had ever felt in my life ran its fingers through my hair. I have worked in Minnesota with -60-degree temperatures, and that hand that ran through my hair felt colder than that. I immediately looked over at my wife, thinking it had to be her. As I reached out and looked over at her, her back was facing me and she was completely out of my reach. Who the hell had just touched me? Feeling a bit exasperated, I jumped out of bed and looked around the room without my glasses, and not seeing anything odd, now knowing I was definitely awake, so I decided to turn on the light near the desk in the room and surf the internet until my wife awoke. I was continuously looking over my shoulder for anyone or anything that might sneak up behind me. My wife awoke around 4 a.m., came over and gave me a kiss, and then she went in to take her shower. When she finished, I told her it was time to leave and that I thought I'd had a ghostly experience that night. She immediately responded with, "Well, that would explain what happened to me the night before." She proceeded to tell me that she was mysteriously awoken around 3:12 a.m. I hadn't told her the time of my occurrence yet, and when she woke, she looked towards the bathroom and noticed the outline of a man standing there. My wife, fearing no man, her daddy was an army drill sergeant, jumped up out of bed and proceeded to chase the unknown predator into the bathroom. However, when she opened the bathroom door, no one was to be found. She dismissed it at the time as a dream, though she would have sworn that she'd been wide awake during the incident. After that, I told her my story, and she said to me, "It's definitely time to leave," which at this point I could not and would not argue with her. The hotel just happened to have a red velvet wallpaper in the hallways. While I was thinking, as I walked to the elevator, I couldn't help imagining a scene from The Shining. All I could see was the boy riding his three-wheeler down the hallways, and then turning the corner, seeing 2 dead girls at the end of the hallway. My imagination was running wild. Obviously there was no such occurrence, but on the way out of the hotel, I told the night clerk what had happened. She locked us out of a hotel, some of which with our bags still inside. So we had to wait until a man came out to smoke before we were even able to retrieve our remaining bags. It's very rude to think if you go to a hotel desk and say, "Oh, I saw a horrible ghost," and she says, "Get out," and locks you out the hotel.
Sure is.
Okay, this next story is called A Golden History. This is by Timothy, and this is in Nevada City, California, and the story takes place in 2003. The old Northern California home, where I was living for a few months, had once been an old brothel in a former lively gold rush-era town. It was also reportedly haunted. My roommates had filled me in on the reported footsteps on the stairs, the strange sounds reminiscent of female laughter, and whispers that would resound through the 3-story house. This house was old and worn, and when you entered you felt a chill and an uneasy feeling, like the walls themselves were watching you. One weekend, my daughter came to visit me. I showed her through the house and began to explain to her that I thought this house was haunted. As we made our way to the rear of the house, the family room, as we called it, I suddenly jumped. Something that could not be seen grabbed me by the back of my neck and put its fingers around me. It was both icy and electric, and my hair instantly stood on end. My daughter, who was in front of me, opened up the sliding glass door to go outside, and as she was in front of me, she went outside, and the sliding glass door slowly closed itself when no one was near it. This door did not move freely, and really had to be forced with 2 hands to close. It closed right before both of our eyes, as the icy hand released its grip off of the back of my neck. My daughter believed in ghosts after that, and I have never again visited that haunted abode. I always like stories that take place in old brothels. I would love to visit. I would love to not only visit but live in an old brothel. It would be awesome.
And work.
And work. Oh, well, work. Not, but you can work in a roughly mill. Okay, A Cry for Help. This is by Charlie P. Racer, and this takes place in Brandenburg, Kentucky. And the story is it's quite a little bit of an older story. 1980. When I was a small child, my family were not very wealthy. So we stayed at my grandmother's to save money in order to move. I shared a king-size bed with my mother and father, so needless to say it was hard to sleep at times. I remember one night in particular, my mother and I were up late talking while my father snored loudly next to us. Out of nowhere, we both started hearing the faint sound of a woman's voice. She was trying to say something. We immediately stopped talking and we listened more closely. The voice was approaching us, so Mum woke Dad up for him to hear also. He said it was just a dog and to go back to sleep. As it got near the open window, we could hear it more clearly now. It was saying, "Help me." My dad heard it now. He jumped up. He yelled at it so loudly, I could actually hear the voice leaving the house through the window, even though we could see nothing. Whatever it was, you could hear it running through the tall weeds toward the cemetery. The next day, we went to put flowers on my grandfather's grave, and the ones that were previously there had actually been moved to a lady's grave who had died in a tornado in 1974. Her name was Martha Son, and her children were all taken by the tornado. My mother was friends with all of the sons. There is no doubt about it in my mind. That voice we all heard that night was Martha's son looking for her children. How do you...
Just a tornado down in Texas.
Was there?
11 people died by Dallas.
Really? That's interesting. What I want to know is when I read a story like this, how do you put two and two together? You're in your bedroom, you hear someone say, "Help me." How do you then go down to the cemetery and say it was this person specifically? Do you just have a feeling? It's very interesting to me. This is another... Let's do, while we're on the topic, let's do another storm story, shall we? Mm-hmm. This story is called A Shocking Storm by Bobby Delaney. And this takes place in Salem, North Carolina, and the story is in 1989. I was born and raised in North Carolina, though I have since moved away. As a child, my father and mother were concerned about storms, especially tornadoes and hurricanes that would hit the area where we lived. We regularly had to load up the car with my brother, mother, father, and myself, and head to the hospital to ride out the storm. On this particular night, at approximately 8 p.m. or 9 p.m., we all got in the car and decided to wait and see what would happen with the weather before actually leaving. I was in the back on the passenger's side, and Dad was driving with Mum beside him, and my brother was beside me. The lightning was really bad, as was the rain. I had a small pillow with me that I always brought along that was sitting in my lap. After about 10 minutes, I looked out of my window up into the clouds, and for a split second it took for the lightning to splint across the sky. I actually saw 10 soldiers. 4 were in the front kneeling, and 4 were standing behind them, flanked on each side, with 1 more kneeling man. I immediately buried my face in the pillow in my nap, and I started to sob hysterically and scream. To this day, I've never seen anything like it, and I have only told 4 people of this until now. It's interesting. So
Do you think it's because of the large amount of energy?
Right.
A lot of people believe that,
So was she seeing it in the clouds, or was she just... Because it actually says in the story that she saw it in the sky somehow. That's very interesting. Can ghosts appear in the sky? I don't know. You're right, maybe it's a storm thing. Okay, this is seasonal because we are just done with Christmas here in Colorado. And the world, for that matter. And as we approach New Year's, I think a little Christmas story is okay. So this story is called Christmas at Grandma's. And this is by Joseph T. Hill. And if you heard that noise, that's my bird squawking in the background. Sometimes he does make a ruckus. And this takes place in Canton, Ohio, 2000. We were having an annual gathering at my grandmother's house. She lived in an old 2-story city house built in 1900. Growing up, the home always had an unexplainably creepy feel to it, so I never spent too much time there. On Christmas Eve, with my family members numbering about 15 to 20... Yes, bird, you're very loud. We sat in the living room, circled around the Christmas tree. The tree was in the corner on a platform and stood about 5 feet tall. I noticed that the tree shook slightly a few times, and I could tell the others had noticed it too. Suddenly the tree rose, levitating about 6 inches in the air, and it violently rotated 180 degrees, and then it simply sat back down. The room grew silent. Everyone had witnessed this tree levitate, and yet nobody knew what to think or say about it. Grandmother seemed unfazed about the whole thing. She said that it happened before and not to talk about it. To this day, this occurrence is the strangest thing I have ever witnessed in my life, and I have no explanation. It's interesting. Poltergeist? Can a poltergeist pick up an entire Christmas tree?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Usually it's smaller things.
Yeah.
Tossed around.
I've never heard of such a large object.
Like
I suppose,
cat.
I have seen bookcases be pushed in stories. So yes, I think that's where we're going to leave it today, actually.
It's a nice festive.
I thought leaving it on a festive note would be fun. If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to make a comment, and we will be doing others. I know this has just been a audio podcast, and in fact audio ones are actually a little easier to do on the fly, and you know how bad I am, for those of you that are subscribed, at making videos, so I might be doing this. But I also did for Christmas get a new camera recorder, so I'm hoping that we will be able to actually do some video podcasts too, so it will look still like a radio show, but you will actually be able to see me talking on it, and guests like Daniel, whoever comes in. So if you enjoyed it, let us know. Okay, thank you for listening, guys. Take care.